Hello, everybody, and welcome to Custora webinar on where retail organizations fall short with segmentation. I'm joined here by CEO Corey Pierson, who's going to be talking today. Corey, do you want to take it away?
All right. First of all, thanks everybody for tuning in. We're psyched to chat through a whole bunch of different things related to the broad concept of segmentation today. So the title talks about where organizations fall short. We're going to talk about why companies segment, some of the reasons that make segmentation's strategies successful and unsuccessful at the highest level. We're going to talk about some common gotchas with segmentation, some productive use cases around segmentation. So thanks again for joining us. If at any time you have some questions, just feel free to use the little chat section within the GoToWebinar interface, and we'll have some time for some Q&A at the end. And with that, I will take it away. So, first things first, a couple more logistics stuff. I talked about a couple of these already, but the last point is the deck will be recorded, shared. So if you do have to tune out or you want to share it with anyone else in the company, just stay tuned afterwards for the deck and the recording. All right. So first things first, it's why segment in the first place. So segmentation is one of those age-old business practices. I remember in like marketing 101, it's like segmentation, targeting, positioning, right? The world is comprised of different types of customers. You want to target the customers that are a good match, position yourself in a way that's appealing to that. And segmentation is really just at the core of so many things. But before we get into the details, the obligatory logo slide of who the heck am I and why do you even care, before I get too deep into my rant of marketing 101. I forgot to finish out the intro here. Custora is a customer analytics, a customer intelligence platform, and we work exclusively with retail. We've been in business for almost a decade now, helping organizations tackle ways to use their customer data to grow lifetime value, to improve top line and bottom line by making use of the wonderful asset of customer data. And today's topic is all about segmentation. So with that, getting back into why do you segment? So, sometimes we get in conversations with brands and they say things to us like, look, I don't believe in segmentation. I believe in one-to-one personalization. And we do believe in one-to-one personalization. There's a lot of ways to leverage customer data, and some of those ways are to use the customer data to improve, every single individual customer's email experience and on-site experience and clienteling experience. But that doesn't preclude the need for segmentation at large. So often, whether you're a B2B company like Custora or a large retailer like an Amazon, you have different customer segments. And while your email marketing, you might be able to break down into every single one of your 90 million, 300 million customers, when it comes to setting company strategy, it's not that simple. Right? It's not, that would be way too granular, another way of saying that, right? You're not going to come up with a company strategy geared around growing 300 million unique customer relationships. You're going to come up with a company strategy that's geared around segmentation. And so, you might realize that a very common and trite example of this is a brand saying, hey, our population is aging. We need to gain traction with millennials. That's a form of segmentation. That brand is basically saying that the younger customer segment they need to gain traction with in order to grow the brand. Now, of course, there's variance across all the different millennials, but on the whole, as you're setting strategy and you're thinking about products to buy and you're thinking about where do these customers shop today, what are they tuning into, where do we want to advertise, all of those things, all those strategic questions come to life more when you're thinking about segmentation. So on a more tactical level, as you walk into marketing campaigns, of course, there are some avenues in which segmentation is helpful there too. So direct marketing campaigns, who should receive the catalog mailer, right? Catalog mailers are expensive. And for the past 30 years, catalog mailers have been improving their segmentation capabilities to send them only where they drive the incremental lift to justify the cost. And so I think, first things first, I think anytime somebody says something like segmentation is dead, or one-to-one personalization is the only thing that matters. Even the opposite, segmentation is all that matters. There's a time and a place for all of these different things. But for all of the hype of personalization, segmentation is kind of like the valuable cousin that hasn't been getting as much time in the limelight, but still we find in the C-suites of most companies is really, really an integral part to most strategies and the growth and even in the tactical deployment of a lot of the different marketing campaigns that go out the door on a daily basis. So some examples on the more tactical examples of segmentation when we get out of the strategy topics are things like, hey, I have a product launch. Which customers might be interested in our new sneakers? Hey, I've got a business strategy to acquire customers that have a higher likelihood to turn into all-star high lifetime value customers. Cool, well, that is a segment you're going to try to prospect of high value customers, or perhaps with your catalog, you're only going to send it to your existing high value customers. Again, it's segmentation. Oh, we got a markdown. We didn't sell enough of the cashmere socks. Okay, who in my population has an affinity towards cashmere? Who in my population is exclusively a markdown shopper? That's the segment of customers that might want to receive it. So again, a lot of different reasons to segment, varying from the strategic down to the tactical. There's other reasons too that it comes up in a sense of you might be in an organization that doesn't yet have the capabilities in place for one-to-one personalization. The emails that go out the door might require your creative team to build a very brand suitable image, creative copy that the team is excited about. Well, whereas you might not have the technology in place to dynamically change the products and the look and feel of every single email to every single customer, there's a little bit of a crawl, walk, run that you can go through with your org. And you can say, look, the first thing we're going to do is just create 2 versions of the daily email to show that the overall response rate goes up. Then we're going to turn it into 3. Then we're going to turn it into 4. And for some organizations, the tail end of that is dynamic SKU personalization. But for some who aren't, where the brand image truly is all that important, it just becomes into 4 or 5 different versions of a daily email. So again, just setting the stage. Every organization is going to use segmentation in a different way. Nearly every organization uses segmentation for strategic purposes. Most organizations have a large number of tactical campaign deployments that are segment-based. And then even those that are very gung-ho on personalization, some of them, the constraints really, what personalization means is segmentation that gradually turns into micro-segmentation on the path to one-to-one personalization. Whoa, that was like buzzword soup, micro-segmentation, one-to-one personalization, but I hope you're tracking along. Cool. So another thing before getting into some of kind of like the things that jack up segmentation exercises or that make segmentation sit on the shelf is to think about how the organization is going to use segments. So before we even get into gotchas and analytical mistakes and some use cases, one of the main things that have been the bane of existence for many retail executives over the past 2 decades, I would say, is they run the segmentation exercise. Sometimes they spend a ton of money on some consultant firm or like user experience consultancy or something that does some cool focus groups. They come up with this really interesting profile of a few customer types that sound really cool and exciting. And then it's a deck that everyone gets really excited about. Maybe you print up the slides of a couple of these different segments, you stick them on some walls, and then the initiative dies, right? 6 months later, no one's talking about those things anymore. And the reason is because it was never systematized, right? It's one thing to theoretically talk about what types of customers might we have. It's another thing to actually have systems in place that enable an organization to act on those segments, monitor those segments, track those segments, target those segments. And it's amazing how many companies kind of still sit in this world of segmentation in a PowerPoint deck as opposed to segmentation throughout their marketing stack. And so the first thing to talk about are just the things you have to do as an organization to equip your company, your team to leverage segmentation, right? So one part is access, right? So I just mentioned learn about the segment, track a segment, monitor, set goals on a segment. These are the things that make the segment meaningful to the organization. So what you don't want to be is the organization where every time you want to target segment XYZ, whatever it is, that are like, cool cashmere customers, that you have to file a ticket for an internal analytics team to say, hey, can you refresh those scores and get me those cashmere lovers, because I really want to target them in a segment, right? If that's the setup, if it's hard for your employees, your teammates, to have self-serve access to get at the segments that they need, then the segmentation initiatives are largely doomed to fail, because nobody has time to wait to pull the segments that you need, right? So part of this is having access to the segment. And then beyond that, it's not just access to pull the list, but it's to learn about the segment. So think about those strategic initiatives. Hey, man, we really want to attract millennials. Well, if your organization doesn't have easy access to pull information about how many millennials did we acquire this month, what channels did we acquire them, what products did they buy first, you're really shorthanded, right? Your company's not going to be able to bring that strategy to life if, again, every single time to report on progress, you're filing tickets and waiting for custom analyses. So accessibility is a really big deal when you're thinking about these things. And so it's one thing to kind of create a central place where your team can come in and you can learn about the different segments and sort of track how are we doing on a customer acquisition, customer retention basis. It's another thing to clone that segment across the entire marketing stack. So you have these sweet looking QVC pipes in the background, and you can think about that as the connection to your email tool and your on-site tool and your call center tool and your social tools. So again, if we continue down this theme of we're going for millennials, we're targeting the millennials in our base differently, we're trying to target and prospect for millennials. Well, if millennials don't exist, if the millennial segment here doesn't exist in those tools, how the hell is the team going to go after them, right? And so a big part of whatever, before we're even getting to what's the right strategy and should you be targeting millennials or something else that might drive an even bigger lift to your business, it's all for naught if when you have a strategy and you have an approach, that approach cannot come to life. So one of the ways, previous slide, we're talking about bringing it to life is allowing people to learn and track and measure KPIs related to segments. Another way is enabling people to act on the segments. And then finally, talk about a communication game plan, right? So when you can learn about your customers and your customer segments, and you have a way to deploy and to act on those customer segments, the final piece is to set the groundwork and have a communication plan in place. So now you're getting into those creative constraints, right? Is there a targeting, a messaging strategy? Is there a creative strategy that varies across those different segments that we're going to deploy in a multi-channel way, right? Is there a product strategy that's going to vary across these segments? So some orgs we talk to, they might put the infrastructure in place and the technology in place for access. They might connect the pipes so that they can act on it, but they actually haven't thought about what they're going to do differently with any of these segments. And so another big component of this little triangle of getting yourself ready is having the teams actually ready to do something with it, right? So again, we're not talking about what to do here, in terms of how to analyze the base, but just simply going through that process. If you're talking to the executives in the organization, it's kind of the building blocks and the foundation for an organization that is ready to leverage segments for growth. All right, cool. So now let's get into some of the different types of segmentation techniques and some that have been helpful and some common gotchas and some use cases. So we can assume for a moment that we've got all of our good customer data together. We can assume we've got an interface to learn about segments. We can assume that those segments are linked up to our marketing stack. So we're really ready to roll right now. But segmentation, it's kind of like a blank canvas. You can segment your customer base in so many ways. And so where do you get started? Right. So I think the traditional form of segmentation, it's the one that even I was using here, and we still hear it all the time. And like large public company CEOs talk about things like demographic segmentation, millennials, my older customers, my males, my female shoppers. And we're not going to claim that there's no religion that we adhere to that says demographic segmentation is completely meaningless. That's not always the case. We can learn a lot sometimes through those things. But I'm sure you all know, as I do, that I've got neighbors that are the same demographic profile, live in the same type of homes, drink at the same bars, eat at the same restaurants, that also fanatically root for the Philadelphia Eagles as they should. But we might have different tastes in the clothing that we wear. Right? So, one might like cashmere, one might like flannel, one might like denim. We're not just defined by the demographic attributes that make up who we are. There's a beautiful human being story in that, right? Our actions, our behaviors define us as human beings. Our demographics do not, right? Judge not by the age and the color of the skin and the religion and all those things that make up a demographic profile. And so that's kind of easy and believable. I'm sure you all have friends that are similar in their demographic profile to you, but have very different tastes in music and clothes and et cetera. Fortunately, I think over the past 10 years, the behavioral segmentation techniques, the technologies that make this more accessible to marketers have taken massive, massive strides. So the reason the industry is so mired in demographics is because it's pretty straightforward and it's pretty black and white, right? Somebody fills in a survey that tells you how old they are, you know their age bracket. But those things, those buckets of age brackets and such are really proxies for trying to get at different types of shopper behaviors that aren't always often described in the most meaningful way by those age buckets. And so I think the first thing we learned is actions speak louder than demographics. And we see consistently, almost without exception, that behavioral segmentation leads to greater lift in marketing in targeted campaigns than demographic. Right. So if you're to look at direct mail results and email results, and you're to compare and contrast the lift that you get when you find a meaningful behavioral segmentation approach versus its next best cousin on the demographic segmentation approach side, almost without fail, we have seen that the behavioral segmentation wins. So that's cool, but we'll get into later, what types of behavioral segmentation, where do you start, how do you do all of that testing? But first things first, you're setting the behavioral versus demographic. I think that's the first big leap that you can take mentally, is to know that we're going to use behavioral segmentation to get started. So the next thing is that I'm going to say, if you're tuning into the webinar to be like, oh, what is the number one way that I could do behavioral segmentation? I regret to inform you that there's really no such thing, right? There are many potential ways to segment behaviorally that might drive a ton of value to your business. But there is no silver bullet that works across the board. And so what you really need to do is prioritize. You need to do some analysis to understand what types of segmentation might lead to the biggest lift. And then you're going to have to run some experiments to actually find out. There's no magic widget that does this for you, right? Like the notion of segmentation is a little bit of art and science, right? Marketers' intuition, the ability to experiment, along with more sophisticated behavioral data analysis, combine to help you arrive at your segmentation strategy. But I think the thing to first keep in mind if you're thinking about behavioral segmentation is how to prioritize. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. You're going to look at the size of the segment. You're going to look at their current ordering behavior. And then you're going to drill down. You're going to say, look, how many customers in this segment are making orders? How much do they spend per order? And you're going to do some prioritization where you might kind of tweak the dials a little bit here and there. And you might say, well, look, maybe I think it's actually reasonable that I could get this segment with whatever targeted communication I'm thinking of to come a little more frequently, or to throw an extra item in their basket, or to stop using discounts quite so much, right? But these are the kinds of things that you should think about, and you should be scenario playing, right? It's kind of fun. Scenario playing is fun, right? But so you can ask yourself, look, if I segment based on male versus female, a demographic attribute, and I think about the product strategies we're rolling out and the different marketing campaigns, what do I think I might be able to get in terms of improvement? Hey, if I think about segmenting based on, the customers who generally purchase mostly in the men's department, but generally purchase mostly in my cashmere department versus those who generally purchase more in my denim department, what do I think the gain might be? And they're going to look at the size of those populations, and you might say, hey, whoa, the new denim collection that we're rolling out this year is dope. It's going to be so hot. I actually think we're going to get more people into the store this year. Or that you're putting in significantly more advertising into the denim product line, then great. You might drag that slider a little bit, on that population when you're doing some prioritization a little bit further, because you're putting the resources behind it. Whereas cashmere's getting no love this year. In fact, you're cutting it. Okay, well, therefore it's going to have an impact. So the moral of the story with prioritization is it's part the data telling you how large these segments are and what is the gain according to achieving certain gains, and it's part understanding what your own company is investing in and what your own constraints are, and together that builds prioritization. But prioritization happens to be a step you would be amazed, or maybe not, on how often it is overlooked in organizations and how easy it is for an organization to fall into the CEO trap of we need millennials And then everyone's talking about millennials, and nobody freaking understands millennials are 2% of the business, and they're the worst customers in your business. And you're not necessarily going to grow your business that much just by saying, we need more millennials, right? Like the step of prioritization is so important, especially if you're in a spot in the organization where you're trying to acquire some buy-in to this, right? You want a multi-channel segmentation approach, a strategic segmentation approach. Well, putting numbers behind it, you go to your boss, you go to the CFO and you say, look, the reason I think we should segment this way is because I see $35 million of growth this way, and our current segmentation strategy has no chance at that, and I promise you, you're going to get their ear, particularly if it is backed up by this type of rigorous analysis on where you're going to get the growth and how that growth is tied to the marketing investments and the product investments that the company is making. So prioritization is a super juicy topic, but yeah, I'll move on. Cool. So within the world of behavioral analytics, behavioral segmentation, there's a few types that kind of pop. So I said there's no silver bullet, but there are a few things to try on for size. And for some of these, this isn't really an either or. It might be that different marketing channels are more susceptible to, are a better match for certain types of segmentation. So you will always hear us talking about lifetime value. We have lifetime value tattooed on our eyelids, on the backs of our hands. Some of us have CLV tattooed on one hand and LTV tattooed on the other hand. And yeah, it's fun. So LTV, lifetime value, right? The amount of value that a customer spends with your brand over their entire lifetime, over their entire customer relationship. It's obviously a key metric for all kinds of strategic analyses. Like it's kind of obvious that you want to acquire customers that buy 100 things, not just acquire customers who will buy once and never return. But it also has a place in targeting, right? So that can be new customer acquisition, where you can look at your best customers, your high lifetime value customers, and use that to inform strategy of where you invest your customer acquisition efforts, or as we'll talk about a bit later, like seeding ad tech and sort of using your first party segments of high LTV customers in digital mediums where traditionally third party audiences rule the day. Another very common place that lifetime value segmentation drive significant improvement is direct mail. So you talk about how a catalog mailer might cost you $10, $5, $1, $30, depends on how intense the catalog mailer is. But in all those cases, it costs a hell of a lot more than an email, right? And so when the marketing action costs a lot, you want to send it to customers where you're most likely to get the biggest bang for your buck in terms of incremental response rate. And it turns out that high LTV, high engaged customers, generally speaking, rule of thumb, are where you're going to see the biggest boost in spend because they're like active, engaged with your brand. And so if you're looking at the flavor of lifetime value that's forward looking, how much are my customers going to spend over the next 12 months, right? You kind of tier customers in your top tier, your middle tier, your low tier. Generally speaking, the ones that are going to react the best to direct mailers are the most engaged. The ones who are already going to spend more, you're going to get them to spend even a little bit more. So it's super helpful. Product affinity is obvious. I think that the best example here is that hey, me and my neighbor are both obsessed with Carson Wentz. He's going to have an MVP season this year as the Eagles quarterback. We're the same demographic profile. That's awesome, except man, he loves cashmere, and man, I would never wear cashmere for the life of me, right? What we're effectively talking about is two people in the same demographic with very different product affinities. And I think product affinity segmentation is one of those things. It's like a gift that keeps giving, right? Your daily emails, your new product launches, your markdown launches, your new arrivals, all kinds of things can make use of customers who have an affinity towards cashmere, customers who have a proclivity to purchasing denim, my shirts and skirt shoppers, my electronic lovers. Every single business that has a variety of SKUs. There's a lot of rich segmentation, and it is rare for us to see a homogeneous demographic group when it comes to product preferences, right? Very, very rare to see that all 25 to 30-year-old females are cashmere lovers, and none of them love denim, right? What is more often the case, and sometimes it surprises marketers, sometimes it's a bit counterintuitive, is that the distribution of cashmere versus flannel versus denim is actually the same across most age demographics, across most gender demographics, right? You think, I can't tell you how many times we've been in a situation in which we thought our millennials loved all of our, jeans with holes in them, when in fact, when you do the analysis, those classes of jeans, those styles of jeans actually are the percentage of customers that buy that style of jeans is the same across all different age buckets. And so beware of the fallacy, the behavioral, the trap of associating like a whole demographic based on the couple of folks or the image that you think of is out there. A lot of people aspire, might see that actor wearing those holy jeans and aspire to be that person, even if they're a little bit older in life. Like there's all kinds of reasons that these things break the mold of what you think. So product affinity segmentation is super, super valuable. Churn propensity, right? So again, behavioral analytics, you go from the simple to the advanced. The simple is you used to buy a lot and you haven't in 90 days or 150 days, right? You kind of flip a switch there, you cross a threshold, and all of a sudden, behaviorally, you're less engaged than you used to be. You're at risk of leaving. You get more advanced and you say, forget about some arbitrary rule like 150 days. Brady over here buys, every single week from company XYZ. Corey over here only buys once a year. Let's not use a 90-day rule. Let's have a more algorithmic way of determining when specific users fade away from their norm. Again, a more advanced form of behavioral segmentation, but there's a tremendous amount of very high value activities and analyses you can do by understanding the segment of customers that is fading, particularly if you zoom into high value customers who are fading. So understanding who they are. My best customers last year, some of them are still buying. That's awesome. Some of them aren't. Why? What kind of stuff did they used to buy that they're not buying anymore? Where are they going, right? How do we reach out to them? We don't want to reach out to them too late. So there's a whole world of learning and campaign targeting to do around customers as they fade away. And finally, retailers, CFOs, and retailers have started to realize that they can't solely rely on the promo. The promo is kind of like a drug. It's hard to wean off of it, right? But when you're really focused on hitting same store sales year over year in a certain target, and when everyone else out there in the mall, on the street, online is offering promos, you kind of feel like you're trapped and you have no choice but to do it. Otherwise, great, you have higher margin people will buy your stuff, but only 10% of them will, and you kind of die. It's a rock in a hard place. But what we're seeing is companies get a bit smarter about understanding. A simple example here is every business has a segment of coupon clippers. All they do is buy when things are on markdown. There's also a segment of people that all they do is buy new arrivals, full margin, right? Or the majority of what they buy, I should say, in these cases. Well, one simple thing you could do is when you have markdowns, focusing on your markdown shoppers. When you have new arrivals, focusing on your new arrival shoppers. But the effect of that is you stop having some of your new arrival shoppers buying a lot of markdowny stuff. Because every time that happens, your CFO might see that as, oh boy, your CFO is sitting there and she's saying, we're losing margin, right? That was a potential high margin order, and now it's turned into a low margin order, and the CFO does not like that, right? And so there's a lot of opportunity for a brand to understand that just as certain customers have an affinity towards cashmere or denim or shoes or whatever, right? So too certain customers have a proclivity to purchase certain types of discounts, certain types of offers. And so these are just a few of many things. And again, right, like obviously when you're talking about maximizing new arrivals and markdowns, the coupon clipping type of segmentation is super valuable, as is the product affinity stuff. When you're doing direct mailers, it's the LTV stuff, right? All of these things have their place in a comprehensive segmentation strategy. So something to walk away from, regardless of what type of segmentation you're using, whether it is demographic or behavioral, attitudinal, or whatever. This acronym that we like to kind of bank on because people remember acronyms. We call it keeping it real, REAL. So forgive the cheese here, but there's some meaningful stuff. The R is the segmentation relevant, right? So you don't want to have you can segment in ways that are just pretty silly, right? For it to be relevant, first things first, what defines a segment is that they are similar within the segment and they are different across different segments. So similar within and different across, right? And so segmentation is not relevant if like you've picked something. I don't know. Think of it like I'm going to segment my customers based on customers whose first name starts with A through M versus N through Z. It's like, okay, like, sure, you have a way to classify those customers, but the two populations are entirely the same in terms of what they buy and how valuable they are and so on. And so the first thing first, and this becomes more important when you're talking about things like someone says, hey, I think we should segment demographically based on age. And you say, well, actually, are those customers actually different? Like, I know that their age is different, but do they behave in different ways? Right. So the relevance of the segment is the first thing to keep in mind. Number two is efficient. We have to be able to use it. So this goes back a little bit to the stuff we were talking about in the beginning of the day, but do I have a way to actually pull this segment? Do I have to file a ticket for my engineering team to refresh a predictive score? Is this a segmentation that the team only updates once a year or even once a quarter? Because like, I can't really use that, right? So, another way to look at this is, hey, if I have 100 segments for my daily email campaigns, I'm never going to get that out there. I can't even get my creative team to give me 2, let alone 100. And so like, are we picking the right number of segments given our constraints? Do I have an easy way to get at them, right? Is there a huge lift to actually do something with these segments? That's where the efficiency comes in. The next thing is actionable. And so this gets into the fact that if you don't have a different way to reach it, there's two sides to the actionableness here. If you don't have an easy way to actually deliver these different segments, different things, then it's all for naught, right? So sometimes we'll see that qualitative survey study, right? And I've seen some things there that just, you kind of scratch your head. You see how it happened, but you're like, wait, really? Like we have a segment and she is a persona and, she works around the clock, 9 to 6 and comes home and cooks dinner and then goes back to work. And he is the single dad and, he's, taking his kids, and there's all this great narrative that get the customers around, but you're like, but then how do you act on that, right? Like maybe strategically somebody's building some products thinking that those segments are real and they exist in the base, and they probably do here and there. But like, is there a different email campaign that you're going to send? And like, do you have a way to send like who belongs in the mom segment and the dad segment? Well, I don't know, right? Like there's this huge disconnect where the whole segmentation exercise kind of is all for nothing if the team doesn't have a way to reach out to these different segments. And so second of all is your message should be different too. So sometimes like you might have the systems in place to find, segment A and segment B, but if you're going to send them the same email marketing thing, then like, what's the point, right? And then finally, the last part is lasting. So this companies run into this trap actually often as they start bridging the gap between historical kind of rule-based segmentation to more predictive segments. So let's take a better version of that persona thing where you could use a behavioral clustering technique to identify that I have one type of customers that maybe is all about shirts and skirts and shoes, and another one that's all about, sweatpants and athletic sneakers, making these two things very different. You call them like the fashion focused segment, the athletic casual segment, right? Well, what can happen, and we've seen this happen before, is as companies grow and evolve, as they start introducing new product lines, they take away some product lines, and the behavioral clustering, what worked 3 years ago, the same clusters don't really exist today. They don't exist in real life, and therefore what was an effective segmentation strategy 2 or 3 years ago is no longer an effective segmentation strategy now. Now, if the strategy was effective for 2 or 3 years, that's still pretty meaningful. But when things are changing on a weekly basis, right? We've had some brands that have brought us in because the internal stuff they did, poor Brady, the customer over here, was part of segment, persona A and then B and then C and then D and then A and then B and then C and then D, right? Very erratic behavior in terms of where the customer was falling. And as a result, right, there was no kind of persistence. You can't actually create a unique brand experience for the people that are in each segment. And so you want to think of a segment, first of all, that you think is going to have the longevity to last you for the whole season, at least a year or two. And second of all, you need ways that when customers get placed in a segment, the world does evolve and no customers stay in the same thing forever. However, there's a little bit of art and science and a little bit of balance to strike here, right? So you want to find segmentation that is meaningful, relevant, meaning that the people in the different segments, the athletes and the fashion customers, are truly different customers who have different sorts of interests. It's got to be efficient. You got to have an easy way to pull up my athletes and my fashion customers to learn about them, to target them. It's got to be actionable, meaning you got to be able to hit a button and deploy those segments into your different marketing tools to send messages. And you want it to be lasting. You don't want to be revisiting the segmentation thing on a monthly basis. It's just not efficient. It's not productive for the organization to do. So if you're thinking about building these strategies, this is a little bit of a useful acronym, a little bit of a checklist that you can go down just to make sure that you're on a track for something that the organization is truly going to use. All right. Cool. So now we're going to shift gears and start talking about some tactics, some common mistakes that people use when analyzing segments, when deploying segments. Lessons learned over the years that sometimes some of our customers are surprised at, but happy to learn to correct the fallacies that they might be operating on. So we'll jump in. So first things first, when analyzing segments, a very, very common question to ask, related to the stuff we were just saying, is what makes the segment unique? And here's our nice little jelly bean example. If we want to analyze the red segment of jelly beans, what we're really asking is, how are the red jelly beans different than all the other jelly beans? What we see a lot of brands do, a very common mistake here, is when analyzing what's unique about the red jelly beans, they'll analyze the red jelly bean group on its own versus total population, which also includes the red jelly beans. And where this gets really, really counterproductive is when maybe the red jelly beans are actually half of the customer base, meaning you're not like, it can significantly bias, the one side of the coin that you're trying to analyze here. What you want to do is understand the unique differences between them. And so it's very just important to parse them out. So this is pretty straightforward and pretty obvious, but it's a very common mistake we see is, great, you can imagine the CRM analyst who's there and is analyzed, here's my whole population stats, order frequency, order amount, product preferences, and now I put that one off to the side on the left side of my spreadsheet. Now I'm going to produce what the results are on the right side of my spreadsheet for 3 or 4 different interesting segments. But the problem is that those 3 or 4 interesting segments also exist in that all population on the left. So you're not doing the most productive comparison there, and it can significantly change the results. So first thing first is just always make sure you're analyzing this segment versus everyone outside of the segment. Cool. Another thing here, the analysis is always a good first step, but you're never going, like an effective segmentation strategy is not created solely, in the database and doing some analysis or in a tool like Custora. You got to get out there and test. Right? What makes a segmentation strategy effective is that it drives results. And when driving results, I think a really, really important thing to budget time for and to get yourself ready to use is to think about incremental lift and incremental measurement. Think about controls and holdouts. So a lot of marketing today, market is way too obsessed with last click revenue, return on ad spend, right? They're tangible metrics, they're meaningful metrics, but you're looking in at like what's driving value today. When you're talking about a segmentation strategy, that is not the way to measure your results. What you want to do is within all of those things, right? Within your email where you're tracking last click revenue, within your direct mail where you're tracking revenue from the people that receive the email, you want to test different strategies. You want to know, is it better for me to segment via athletes versus fashion folks, or via folks that I acquired from affiliates versus folks that I acquired from, our natural organic, email acquisition campaign, or who knows, right? Like those are the questions that you want to answer. So you can set it up. You can break your population down. You can send different types of messaging to your different types of segments to actually prove, hey, here's a segment I think is unique. I'm going to send them my regular undifferentiated email, and I'm going to send them the email of the stuff that I think they care about more. Am I going to see a lift in the 2 groups? This is not something you can measure with last click, right? It's, hey, the folks that are getting the stuff that we think is relevant are ordering, here's their conversion rate, here's the revenue per order, here's the profit margin per order, here's the type of stuff they're buying, versus that same segment when they receive other messaging, what do they get? How about other segments when they get, if I send my fashion people the athletic stuff, does it resonate or not? I would expect it not to, right? So there's all different, experimental design is a huge, rich topic for its own webinar. But the point here is you really got to get in the mindset of don't don't assume your segmentation strategy is going to make a lick of difference without testing and experimenting. It doesn't matter how good the analysis is. At the end of the day, if it's not driving lift, it just doesn't matter. And so bake that in to your roadmap, right? You're going to run some analysis. You're going to find what the data suggests might be the most informative segments. You're going to do that prioritization. Then you're going to get out there into the wild and you're going to test it, and then you're going to iterate on it, right? And it's a process that can yield extremely high, impact results, but it is a process. And so don't forget control groups. Don't forget the importance of measurement and experimentation. And finally, this one continues to surprise customers. Something we call the has ever fallacy. So a very, very common trap that companies will fall into, particularly when thinking about lifetime value. Yeah, in this example, we say, hey, how much more valuable are customers who have ever bought banana socks? How much more valuable are customers who have downloaded our app? How much more valuable are customers who are omni-channel instead of that only shop online, excuse me? How much more valuable are the customers who have ever returned something? How much more valuable are the customers who signed up for an in-store event? In all of these questions, it's how much more valuable are customers who have ever done X? And the question makes sense, but there's some really, there's a very, very big gotcha here, just how you do the analysis to answer that question. So if you're asking in this picture, say the question was, how much more valuable are the customers who have ever bought banana socks? What we've illustrated here is obviously customer one is more valuable, but the question that you need to ask is customer, is the case that customers who buy lots of things, it is more likely that one of those things was banana socks, or was there something causal? Does somehow when you buy banana socks, you are more likely to buy even more things? And that's a very tricky question to answer with statistical analysis, because for the most part, if you simply do a query in your database and say, let me find customers who have ever bought banana socks, how valuable are they? It will be higher than the population average. And that will be the case no matter what you pick, because there is this reality that whatever you're filtering down on, the people who have bought 10 things are far more likely to have ever done your one thing once. It's like the old, I don't know if you ever took probability classes in high school or college or whatever, where it was like, you got a sack of red and green balls and I'm going to reach into it. What's the probability that I'm going to grab a blue one if I reach in once? What's the probability that I'm going to grab a blue one if I reach in twice or 3 times, right? That's the same type of things happening here, right? The customer one in this picture has reached into the knapsack 5-6 times. So it is more likely that one of them pulled out the banana socks. It doesn't mean that the banana socks actually are causing it to be higher LTV. So what can you do? Well, you could ask the question, hey, customers based on what customers buy first, who's more valuable? It might be the case that people who buy banana socks first are more likely to then go on and become awesome customers. That's one way. You can say, hey, let's tag each customer with whatever product they bought most common. The group all, like this person bought 1 banana sock, 1 dress, maybe they bought 3 banana socks and something else. You can compare people whose most common purchase was banana socks versus sneakers and which one's more valuable. There are ways to normalize, there are ways to mitigate this thing to actually get at the causal question that's probably the one you're really trying to ask. But you want to really, really beware of the has ever fallacy. And we have seen has ever mistakes in analysis all the way up to the C-suite of public companies, right? Like it's a kind of thing that is very easy to fall into a trap of. So just a few gotchas to whet your appetite. Actually, in our Custora platform right now, we actually prohibit you from seeing, we kind of bake the has ever safeguards, if you want, bumpers to prevent you from even clicking on certain types of information when you're pulling has ever segments to wean people away from doing this sort of analysis and push you towards doing it in a more legitimate analysis to find causality. And so that's how strongly we believe, because the results can be wildly misleading as a result. So something to keep in mind. So we're going to close this out before we take a couple of questions by just when you're, we kind of talked about setting the groundwork. We talked about segmentation strategies that are meaningful and keeping it real. We talked about some fallacies. so like when we get into it, how do we generally recommend getting things off the ground? One of the types of segmentation that we find tends to resonate pretty well with companies is to think of life cycle segmentation, right? And I use this as one, you don't have to go on the life cycle, but I'm going to go through a series of steps that can be a very effective blueprint for how to get the company rallied around this thing to get these campaigns up, starting with the prioritization all the way through actual campaigns. So typical process we go through with our customers is like, look, every new customer goes through a cycle. Maybe we capture their address, their email address, and we call them a member, and then boom, they've made a purchase. Now they're an active customer. What we want to do is have them, keep them nurtured and get them active and cool and repeat buying. And of course, at some point in time, some customers cool down and they go through various stages of cool off. And that's different segmentation based on the stage of the life cycle. Well, let's make the segmentation strategy have some legs and some life, and let's think, hey, you know what I'm going to do? I'm not just going to talk about life cycle segments. I'm going to talk about what we're going to do to those segments, because that's going to be really important as I start prioritizing, right? What I'm going to think about is, hey, if I were to take my high value segments, when I think of finding customers in the first place, what kind of avenues are out there for me that I'm not doing yet today? What kind of upside is there in allocating more of my dollars on the acquisition side to attracting more of those good customers? Great, now I got my existing customers. A couple different things I might do. I'm going to go through that prioritization. Hey, how many one-time buyers do I have? What if I move the needle a little bit? What's that size of the prize going to be? Hey, my repeat buyers, maybe there's a subset that I'm going to try to drive more frequency on, and a separate subset that I'm just going to drive more purchase price on for, maybe they're already there at the store a lot or something, right? Again, devil's in the details here. You're going to go through a bunch of different slicing and dicing of your different behavioral segments, but put it all in a landscape like this and put price tags on it. And it's amazing what this does when you show this to the CMO and the CFO and the CEO, right? You're not just talking theoretically about should I segment based on, this, that, or third. There's dollar amounts on these things, right? There's priority. How much money is it if we can slow down customer attrition for the high value customer segment? Might that drive 10% revenue growth next year? It might. We've seen it. We've seen it be bigger than that, right? But so orienting around, look, I've got customers of different value. I've got customers different stages of the life cycle. I want a segmentation strategy that is going to be actionable, that I can think of different things that I might do with different goals and different content for different types of customers. This is a really good skeleton. And you can layer in on top of this the fashion versus the athletes. Those can go in to every single one of these blocks, right? And so on and so forth. So starting place like that, again, the communication strategy, the organizational realities of trying to roll this stuff out, very big part of the process here is you get your company leveraging data, leveraging segmentation to drive more growth. In order to do any of this, you got to have the technology underpinning to tag customers and where they are in value tiers and where they are in these different life cycle stages and where they are in terms of being more athletic customer or fashion focused customers. So that's kind of the table stakes, right? And that now you're getting into implementing things on top of that. And then you can get into the details, right? Converting one-time buyers. We did a whole webinar on this. Check it out on our website. We wrote a whole book on this, right? But what kinds of segment? How do you segment customers when you only have that one super meaningful data point of what they bought first? How do you roll out tests? How do you triage? What does crawl, walk, run look like? There's a lot more than you can do than what we see most companies doing. The reality here, if you're going to try to solve standard industry approach is I got a one-time buyer problem, I'm going to set up a welcome series email trigger. Yeah, it doesn't work, right? You're not going to solve your one-time buyer problem with an email welcome series alone or a single email trigger. Anyone who tells you that is like smoking a little bit of the I don't know what you call it, email welcome series crack. It just doesn't work, right? And think about it as a shopper. Oh, I wasn't gonna buy something, but boy, was that email great. No, it is a part of the strategy, but you really need to understand different segments of your customers, who's converting, who isn't converting. You need to incorporate. It's why the segmentation strategy stuff is so important. You need the ability to experiment. You need the ability to learn about, hey, are people who buy a certain product the ones that are converting, or are certain demographics or certain people who we acquire through certain channels? There's so much information and strategic decision making that has to go into doing this, as well as the ability then to rapidly be experimenting across multiple channels, and to have a touch point, a communication system in place that isn't a single email at day 27. It isn't even one special email a week for the first 4 weeks. It's multi-channel and it's much more frequent if you're truly going to hope to catch their attention over their, the immediate 30, 60 days after purchase one, which we know empirically is such an important time. We talked a little bit about use cases around lifetime value, direct mail, and product affinity for like product lifecycle focused emails. We talked a little bit earlier today about churn. Now here I would say one of the most common and valuable things is to triage the business between high value customers and low value customers. We want to save everybody, don't get me wrong, but you're going to roll out the red carpet. Those high value customers, no joke, we work with brands where high value customer churn was costing them 15% of their annual revenue every year, slipping out from great shoppers who are fading away, right? So talk about a high leverage initiative to come up with a way to really reach out. And this company made a significant dent on that stuff too, right? What they did was, first they had a way to tag these customers, not with a cheesy rule-based approach, but with something really meaningful to understand that specific users, algorithmically, to understand that specific users were fading off their cycle. And then their version of rolling out the red carpet included phone calls, interviews, direct mails, of course, emails, social. Like, it was just worth spending so much more because these customers were worth 10 to 15x the average new customer that they were acquiring. And so the disproportionate effort paid off and then some for them to go after it stuff. You can really do a lot here, but again, it starts with having the ability to understand who the hell is at risk, what's unique about them, how do we reach out to them in a multi-pronged way to actually get their attention, have a real conversation with them, and then you really can move the needle. So I think that rounds out some good stuff, and I've left just a few more minutes for some for some follow-up Q&A. So I'm just pulling up the questions that have come in, and we've got a few questions here that I will rattle off. All right, so we got one question. It talks about question drilling into the holdout groupie stuff, talking about how to test with segmentation. And in our typical A/B tests that we might be doing with our Optimizely or our on-site tool or in our email, right? How can we layer in segmentation to the A/B testing we're already doing is the specific question. I think there's a couple of ways, right? So one way you could do this is you can think, hey, look, I'm actually going to I'm going to create two versions of the landing page on our website. One for my athletes and one for my fashion customers. Now, in order to do that, I've got to flow in who are my athletes and who are my fashion customers to my on-site tool. So step one, right? Then you can set up the landing pages to triage based on who's in segment A, fashion, who's in segment B, athlete, and you can go from there. But another thing you can do before you even connect the dots for all that stuff is to look at what you're doing and see if different segments are responding differently with whatever your status quo is. So for example, you might be sending out emails today and what you're analyzing is last click revenue, but you can do better. You can look at conversion rates and stuff after the fact broken down by different customer segments. So we had a company once that we were working with, and they were doing these new product markdown emails. And unfortunately, prior to working with Custora, it was sort of a one size fits all. Like the merch team would be like, we're not selling enough cashmere. And so everyone in the user base would get cashmere's on sale today, right? But what they were kind of interested in was, are we actually moving more cashmere on those days, right? And one of the ways that we convinced the merch team and the marketing team to start doing a more fruitful, carved out segmentation approach on markdown days was by looking at it and showing them that when they pushed out those cashmere sale emails, the only people biting were the segment that had an affinity to cashmere. So it was much easier for us then to go make the case saying, look, guys, rather than sending the email to everyone, we're only going to send it to the people who have a prayer's chance of buying the cashmere, and everyone else is going to get the email that was focusing on other products, and everybody wins, right? But the way that we got there was by doing what they were doing today, which was everybody gets cashmere, and then analyzing the results on a segment level. So again, this requires you have some technology in place, or just a team that can turn around these results pretty quickly. I certainly advocate the technology route for obvious reasons, but have a way to look at a campaign and dissect the results by segments. And that can, you might not set up the A/B test in the front, but you can still gather the results on the back. There's a question about first party and third party segmentation, and it's really just starting with the basics of like, what are they and where are they useful? So first party and third party are terms that are largely thrown around in the ad tech world, but now have sort of permeated as ad tech and marketing tech, and like CRM and ad tech have kind of started to fuse together a little bit. So third party segments means you're segmenting on data that the brand itself didn't acquire it. The brand got it from some third party. So you all might be familiar. There's companies like Experian out there, and they are tagging certain customers with, an age group, an income range, sometimes really cool names like Golden Oldies and Power Elite and all kinds of different personas. How they get that information is a little bit of a black box. Maybe they have data partners and they've picked up pieces associated with addresses. Who the heck knows, right? But the ad tech community has used this stuff because it tends to be in aggregate better than just random noise, right? Like they're not just continuing to use these segments for no reason at all. But the reality is, if you were ever to look up yourself, as some of these services do, and I looked up myself once, it told me I lived in California. I don't. It told me I was a different age group, told me I had an income range that I really wish I had, but I don't have. And so on a specific person, it could be kind of weak, but in aggregate is more right than wrong. That's third party data. First party data is different. It's data about your customers. There's no ambiguity about it. Your customers bought X. Your customers were acquired through a certain channel, right? All forms of behavioral segmentation, or sometimes it's self-reported demographics. Your customers have told you their birthday because they want the birthday offer, and so the accuracy might not be perfectly true, as people couldn't lie, but it still is first party in that these are things that your customers have shared with you via the actions they've taken on your website and in your store. First party segmentation has been the only way that CRM teams have been segmenting. They've been in the customer file and slicing in data. And ad tech people traditionally were only using third party data because ad tech is done by targeting browsers and cookies, and there used to be no way to connect these two worlds. Over the past 5 years, you'll hear ad tech companies talk about onboarding first party data, which is basically saying, hey, CRM team, you can throw some segments into our platform and we'll help you target those segments via these traditionally impression driven areas. Like we'll help you target display ads, Facebook custom audiences, Facebook ads. So now there are ways to take your first party, right, your own real CRM-y segments, and use them in more places. You can take your first party segment, toss it over to Facebook and say, hey, Facebook, go find people who look like this for a prospecting campaign, right? So there's a lot of different ways to leverage first party segments, and it's really picking up in steam, but it requires sort of a meeting of the minds, the holding hands of departments in your organization that might be disparate, right? That being the marketing CRM side of things and the more media focused display and TV and social focused people. But fortunately, they're all kind of coming together now, and the results can be pretty compelling. So I think we got time for, oh no, we're actually out of time. It's 3:45. So with that, we're going to close off this one. Please send feedback. If you have any questions about the stuff we talked about, don't hesitate. If you're interested in how Custora can help you take your segmentation level game up to the next level, right? Our technology platform does pretty much all the pieces we talked about, from sizing up different types of segments to powering different types of behavioral analytics, to giving you an interface to easily set up experiments and design ways, to being able to track and track goals and track metrics on any segment that your heart desires you to go look after. Our whole goal is to make it so you don't have to file tickets for that stuff, to really put the power in your hands to go after these initiatives with a lot more speed and a lot more relevance. So thank you for listening. Again, I'm Corey at Custora, and we are psyched for you to tune into our next webinar and for you to chat with us if you think we might be able to help your brand.